Hi everyone, in this video we will learn how to implement GitHub Actions. We will specifically implement the GitHub action for a personal free account. GitHub Actions is a continuous integration and continuous delivery, also known as CI/CD platform, that allows developers to automate their build, test, and deployment pipeline. The main component of GitHub Actions is the workflow. A workflow is a configurable automated process that will run one or more jobs. Workflows are defined by a YAML file. Workflows must be stored in a .github/workflows directory in order to be executed. A workflow can be triggered by a specific event, such as a pull request, on a schedule, or on demand within the GitHub Actions tab. A workflow is executed by a runner, which is a virtual machine. GitHub provides Ubuntu Linux, Microsoft Windows, and Mac OS runners to execute workflows. Users can also host their own runners rather than using the ones provided by GitHub. As of May 2024, GitHub limits free accounts to 2,000 CI/CD minutes per month. For most developers, this will be more than enough time to automate scripts within their personal repository. Now that we have an overview of GitHub Actions, let's review the code that we will automate. I am using Visual Studio Code as my integrated development environment. I will navigate to the GitHub Actions directory within my repository. Within GitHub Actions, I have another folder that I am currently in called Stock Downloads. We can see that we have 3 files here. I am first going to navigate to the Python script. The Python script will retrieve the current stock price of Apple as well as the date and time the stock price was recorded. The script will append the data into an existing CSV file that we have here. As the script is run, it will append more and more rows of Apple's stock price as well as the date and time that the stock price was retrieved. Please note that some of these times have been taken after hours, so there's no change to the stock price. I also have a requirements text file here. We will use this text file to install the Python packages that we need in order to run the Python script. Next, I need to ensure GitHub Actions is enabled on my repository. I'm going to bring up my repository in my browser. On my repository page, I am going to select Settings. On the left, we see the Actions tab. I'm going to select that. And I'm going to select General under Actions. I'm going to make sure that I allow all actions and reusable workflows in the first configuration here. I will leave the default settings for the artifact and log retention. For the next setting, I am going to require approval for all outside collaborators. This is a stricter setting that is more secure than the other options. Finally, I need to ensure that the workflow has read and write permissions and that GitHub Actions can create and approve pull requests. Once we have that configured, I am going to go to the Secrets and Variables tab, and I am going to select Actions. Secrets allows you to configure variables that a script needs, but you may want hidden from other users. In my case, as a demonstration, I will create 2 repository secrets. One for my email, which I will need to configure in the code, and another for my username. We will select New Repository Secret. We need to name our secret. For the first one, I am going to name it Email. And under Secret, I am going to input my email. Once that is input, I am going to add the secret. And it is added. Please note, after you input the secret, you or anyone else is unable to view the input for the secret. I'm going to go back and create one for my username as well. Let us go back to our code in Visual Studio. The first step I need to take to set up GitHub Actions in my repository is I need to create a GitHub Workflows directory. I'm going to do this within VS Code. I'm going to right-click and create the directory. Within the newly created directory, I am going to create my YAML file. I will name it run_py_script.yaml. And I have my YAML file up in my editor. Please note that YAML files are prone to simple indentation or spacing errors. The first time you write one, you may have to iterate it through a few times to get the indentation correct. At the top, I am going to name my workflow. I will call it stock data download. Now I have to specify which event will trigger the workflow to run. I am going to trigger the workflow on a schedule every 10 minutes, which will be defined under cron. Underneath the schedule, I am also going to add a workflow dispatch, which will allow me to manually run the workflow from the GitHub website. Next, I am going to define the job that will be run for the workflow. In my case, I am going to run a single job, which I will name execute Python script. I need to define a runner. I will use Ubuntu latest, which will utilize a GitHub virtual machine of the latest Ubuntu version. Now I can define the underlying steps of the job. The first step is going to use an action called checkout. Similar to code repositories that are stored on GitHub, there are also GitHub action repositories you can access. The checkout action allows the runner or virtual machine to access our code. Next, we will set our Python version using the setup Python action. This will set up Python on our virtual machine or runner. I will specify my Python version as 3.12.3. Now that we have our Python version set, I need to install all the Python packages my script is dependent on in the next step. I will name the step install dependencies, and I will run pip install -r requirements txt. I also need to set my working directory as GitHub actions /stock download. Now I can run my Python script within the action. I will name this step run PyScript, and I will run the stock download Python script. I again will set the working directory as GitHub actions /stock download. For our final step, I need to commit the updated CSV file to my GitHub repository. I will name the step commit and push changes. I will call on run, then I need to put a vertical bar in to input multiple commands. I need to configure the credentials each time the action is run because every time we have a new runner, it will need to have credentials. I will use git config for both the username and the email. I will call on our secrets for both that we added earlier to our repository. I have to add the changes using git add, and then commit the changes with git commit, and finally push the changes with git push. We again will set the working directory as GitHub actions and stock download. I also need to set an environment variable called GitHub token. At the start of each workflow job, GitHub automatically creates a unique GitHub token secret to use in the workflow. When GitHub Actions is enabled, GitHub installs a GitHub app on the repository. The GitHub token secret is a GitHub app installation access token. We are done with our YAML file. I'm going to go down to the terminal and run git add, which adds a change in the working directory to the staging area. I will commit the change and say added GitHub workflow. Finally, I am going to push the change with git push, and we can view our action on GitHub. Within my repository on the GitHub website, I can click on Actions. And when we have a red X like this is a failure. Let's take a look at the issue. And this is a good example of a typical problem with GitHub Actions. There is an error in my YAML file. I am going to go back and fix it to see if we can get GitHub Actions to run. I went back to the repository and fixed the indentation error on the YAML file. Now what we are going to do is check out the workflow itself. I am going to click on stock data download. We see we still have that failure run, and you could have that and keep it, or you can delete it by deleting the workflow. I'll keep it because I think it's good practice to have a record of any failures. What I'm going to do is first run the workflow on demand. The way that we do this is we're going to click the Run Workflow button here. And we can see that this is for the main branch, and I am going to run the workflow. We can refresh our page, and we can see that the workflow is in progress when it is yellow. I am going to click on it. We have our overall job here. I can click within the job. And we can see as every step is executed, we have the outputs here. And if there is an error in the code, then this will pop up within the step. Once it turns green, we know that we have successfully run our workflow. What I'm going to do is within my repository, go to my GitHub Actions directory and see if the CSV file was updated. We can see that the Apple CSV was updated just now. We can click on it. And we have the dates and times here. I did run it once earlier just to make sure it was working correctly. So we have 2 dates from today that successfully ran. Since I also included a cron job, what I'm going to do is go back to Actions and wait 10 minutes to see if the GitHub action will execute. After about 10 minutes, coming back to the Actions tab, we can see that we have another workflow run. And we can see why GitHub Actions is such a helpful DevOps tool, because it can take the manual process out of the equation and help us automate our code base and make things more efficient. If for whatever reason I need to stop a workflow from executing every 10 minutes, what I could do is I can go back into the workflow itself. If we click on the 3 buttons here, there is an option to disable the workflow. This will stop the cron job from continuously executing the workflow if we need to stop it for whatever reason. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope that this video was helpful. If you found the video helpful, feel free to like and subscribe. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, X, GitHub, Medium, and Odyssey. Thanks again everyone, and happy coding.